you were vilified as these fringe epidemiologists, even though at the time I remember it was like Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, really legit. And then when I had Martin on, he was like really legit. And yet at that point, it was now against the narrative that everyone had adopted, whether that came from the WHO or whatever. When you explain that to people, is that hard for them to get their heads around?
It really is. I mean, I think people, their memories of March are dim. Like they just think of this as like a huge panic that happened, a huge bad thing that happened, and then that the governments were doing extraordinary things to try to like address the huge panic. They forget that in fact what they did really was so absolutely extraordinary, so out of the norm for dealing with respiratory virus pandemics. For a century, we followed the Great Barrington Declaration. We did I mean, in pandemic after pandemic after pandemic, as recently as 2009, the swine flu pandemic, we lock down? No, we did not lock down. We did as we protected vulnerable people. We developed vaccines as rapidly as possibly could, deployed them at scale especially for older people and other vulnerable people. In 2003, the SARS-1 epidemic, we didn't lock down. If you go back through the recent history, 1976, there was another H1N1 flu pandemic. 1968, 1956, you get pandemic after pandemic after pandemic where you don't lock down. What you do is you do the Great Barrington Declaration. You protect the vulnerable people as best you can, figure out who they are and protect them as best you can. And for the rest of the population, you don't disrupt society because you know that's going to cause more harm than good.
Right. And the harm that comes from shutting things down, just to be clear with people, I remember that even when you drop GDP, actually lives are lost as a direct correlation of that. And then you've got the mental health issues, the damage to children as they're growing up. Then you cited some other really dark statistics in other second and third world countries where some kids never went back to school. Then there's all the trafficking and sexual abuse. Talk to people, because a lot of people can't quantify the numbers they see on the screen of dead people versus this future damage of a lockdown.
So just to play off the statistic you're alluding to, Brian, in Uganda, they closed schools for 2 years on the basis of advice essentially they got from the World Health Organization to lock down. Now, of course, in Africa, the all-cause death from the deaths from COVID, the age-adjusted deaths from COVID are pretty low. I mean, and mainly because they're a young continent, like 3% of the continent is over the age of 65. Very low vaccination rates, so it can't be that. It's really because they're younger. In Uganda, they closed schools for 2 years, and for many kids, that doesn't mean Zoom school. That means no school for 2 years, and then when they reopened, 4.5 million of those kids never came back. And the UN did this report on what happened in many of these poor countries. Many of these poor countries, the parents were faced with starvation for their families. And so they faced a choice, either starve, including starving their kids, or send their kids into sexual slavery or child labor into terrible working conditions. That's the choice they did. And many of them, in order to save the lives of their kids and their family, did the second. They sent their kids into sexual slavery. Those 4.5 million kids, their lives are ruined. And many of them, and we know from this it's one of the most important findings in health economics, which is one of my major fields. If you're poor, especially if you're desperately poor, your health is going to be terrible. You're going to live shorter, less healthy lives as a consequence. We put basically 100 million people around the world into dire poverty, $2 a day or less of income, as a consequence of that one decision we made in March of 2020. And the people that were saying, well, you can't think about economics, it's immoral. Well, you know what? It was immoral not to think about the economics of what would happen to the poor when you shut down the world's economy. When people talk blithely about supply chains being ended, what it really means is some poor person in the middle of nowhere is going to starve to death as a consequence of what we did. It was entirely predictable. It's exactly what's happened. I mean, the exact numbers maybe we can argue it, but like the fact that we, how many lives actually did we save by those lockdowns in order to justify the harm we did to the poor? I mean, I think everyone that that supported lockdown should ask themselves, how many poor people's lives make it okay for that decision to be made. And it'd be one thing if it actually did save lives. We can talk about that in a second, maybe. Did they? But the evidence is that it didn't save very many lives.
So Jim Rickards has just recorded a video that's not available to anyone in the public, and he's going to be talking about how this upcoming recession is going to be fast, it's going to be bloody, it's going to be nasty. But at the same time, he's going to show you how you can position yourself to profit from all of this chaos. Now, we've made this video only available to our viewers. Go to londonreal.tv/Jim. Watch that immediately. I can't say enough good things about Jim Rickards. He understands the global economic system better than any guest I've ever had on London Real. His predictions are almost uncannily true, and you can learn how to profit from his vision, from his expertise, and his understanding of economics. So go to londonreal.tv/Jim or click the link below. It's an excellent, excellent look on what's going to happen in the future and how you can position yourself to profit from that. Jim is one of the best in the business, one of my favorite guests on London Real, and he's very, very good at predicting the future and showing us all to profit from it. So click the link, and I hope you enjoy. Hey, it's Brian Rose, founder of the DeFi Academy. I've told you my 4-week crypto bootcamp is amazing, but don't take my word for it. This is what my students are saying.
The DeFi Academy was an amazing experience for me. It took me totally out of my comfort zone.
In this course, I was challenged, I was held accountable, and pushed to do things that honestly weren't always easy.
It's been phenomenal, and I can't believe we're already up on our 4 weeks. It has flown by.
Going through this DeFi accelerator by far was one of the best courses I've taken.
You do this course, you really get into the nitty-gritty of the activities that will make you comfortable with decentralized finance.
Thank you so much to Brian and everyone at London Real and the DeFi Academy for even putting together an amazing course like this.
Anybody else that wants to do it, please sign up. It is well worth the money.